I am Alexa Burns, and today I'm presenting the building in ancient Pompeii that I have chosen, which is the amphitheater. I'll share my screen. Alrighty, so I will be reviewing its locations, its physical attributes, as well as its purpose. Some graffitis that I found in and around the amphitheater, as well as just some overall details that I found pretty interesting. I do want to state for the record that all of this information is collected throughout my research for this project. I don't cite any of it in the slideshow. However, it's all the same information that I cited from in my actual report. I also will be looking down a lot. I don't know if it's obvious through the camera, but I do have a set of notes to keep me on track. I am a bit of a rambler, so that's just to keep me going. So let's start off with its location. The amphitheater was located in Regio II in the eastern part of the city. Regio is Latin for region, and this phrase is just used to describe exactly where the amphitheater was located on their maps of Pompeii. The way they were able to characterize each region was through physical, political, and even cultural descriptions. So I did provide a map. It is a bit small, but you can see this red outlining around it. Now that is to symbolize the Pompeii walls. And in this bottom right corner with the big oval is actually the amphitheater. So it's tucked away all the way near the bottom right of the walls. Next, I want to talk about the physical attributes and the purpose of the amphitheater. So I do have some imagery scattered around of the outside and inside of this building. As you can see from the pictures of the inside, which is this one and this one, the structure is almost crypt-like because of its enclosure. And from all my readings, all the architects, the architects that have written and researched about this, they've all described it as almost crypt-like. So the outside of the amphitheater is surrounded by these beautiful column-shaped architecture, as you can see here, and that just kind of wraps around the entire amphitheater, as well as these two grand staircases that lead all the way to the top of the top row of seating. So there are 4 entrances, including those stairs, and another one actually grants access to the bottom rows of seats. So these seats were actually divided a bit by class. And since the purpose of the amphitheater was for people to watch a gory gladiator show, they left the bottom row of the seating that was closer to the show for upper class citizens or citizens of rank. Now, this was called Ima Cavea. Don't know if I'm saying that right, so excuse me if I'm completely butchering it. But that was just to symbolize that upper class. Then there was Media Cavea, which meant medium or middle, and then Summa Cavea. Now, these sections were meant for ordinary people, the poor, or women. Now, since these shows were free showings, everyone was allowed to come. However, it was important for politics that people of different classes were separated. They also did have special quarters that were meant for injured gladiators. However, it was mostly used to store the dead bodies of said gladiators. The building itself, like I mentioned before, is in the corner of the city walls near the Palestra, which was like the sports center. It's where all the gladiators trained for the fights, and the gates of River Sarno. Architects took great advantage of the location physically because it's what allowed the divot in the amphitheater that creates the stadium for the shows to take place in, as well as forms the steep downhill of the seating. I know this picture is kind of small, but you can kind of see a little bit how the seats are on a very steep slope. And that's how it is all around the amphitheater. And it's really because of the location that they chose to build the amphitheater that they were able to create those steep like stairs. Much like today with celebrities, at this time they actually had posters around the amphitheater walls of their gladiators, typically their winning ones. So this leads to my next topic, which is the graffiti. So the images I've included are just examples of what graffiti would look like in the ancient Pompeian buildings. Like I mentioned, graffiti wasn't the only thing scattered across the amphitheater walls. They also had posters to glorify their gladiators. I've quoted two pieces of graffiti right over here and this one. Now, I'm not exactly 100% sure what language that is, so I'm not gonna even attempt it, but I will translate it. So the first one translates to, now that I have taught the stones to speak kind words, good luck to Claudius Verus. And the second one translates to, you have won all fights. It is one of the seven miracles. So this could be up to a numerous amount of languages. At the time, they did mostly speak in Latin, Greek, and Oscan. So I am just assuming that it's one of those. I took these pieces of graffiti from the database, uh, not the graffiti database, but the spreadsheet that you provided. So it didn't exactly say which language it originated from, but I'm guessing it's one of those three. I think what fascinates me the most about these pieces of graffiti is how they were used to communicate. I'm pretty used to the term graffiti being used to describe street art or just some funky thing that some kid graffitied on the side of a wall. But these pieces of graffiti from this era are actually used politically. The first phrase is used to congratulate someone, whereas the second phrase is used as a kind of threat or just like a phrase of violence. It's kind of crazy to me that people were just able to publicize pretty much everything down to really graphic texts. While researching the amphitheater, I did come across some other pieces of graffiti from different buildings in Pompeii, and some of them got really raunchy. So it just brings into question where the so-called government draws that line. Lastly, I just want to talk about some things that I found pretty interesting while researching. These images are a little hard to make out, but they all have like a similar kind of vibe, and they're just to depict what interested me the most about this module and report. This is the reason that I kind of chose the amphitheater because although the games held at the amphitheater come off a bit cruel and gory, I think learning about it through the process of researching really just stuck with me. I've always enjoyed learning about the psychological well being of people during different eras of history, and reading about how they parade and root for people to die as a form of entertainment and ritual really brings into question their right mind and what they considered crossing a line. So while researching the purpose of the amphitheater, I got a lot of facts about how gory these games really are and how people just celebrate it as a form of ritual, celebrating the dead. They just parade around, and it's really interesting. Because it makes me wonder how far they're willing to go to protect themselves as well as, their families, if they're so comfortable with this kind of violence. Another thing that was really interesting to me, as well as something new that I did learn, was the profit made from these shows. I wasn't able to find much imagery on the topic. However, there was actually profit to be made through these shows. Although the shows themselves were free to the citizens of Pompeii, they rented out to vendors who would sell merchandise and goods that they made, much like a concert, how there's people selling t-shirts and all kind of merch. Basically, that was what was going on in during these shows. People could buy food from vendors, they could buy merchandise. It's very modern. This made me wonder whether they were simply getting money from, renting out those spaces, or if they were getting a cut from whatever these vendors were making. I found this interesting because although I knew vendors did sell merchandise throughout Pompeii, I didn't really think that this form of salesmanship was popular throughout ancient Rome. Just because it's not typically mentioned, you don't really hear a lot of like stuff about people selling merchandise or selling things that they make. I thought that was like a newer idea, but apparently it's not, and that's really cool. So this does conclude my slideshow on my Pompeii report. I really enjoyed learning not only about my building, but just about what makes Pompeii the city that it was. And I look forward to furthering my knowledge on this topic. Thank you so much.